if an individual is to behave, he or she goes by their own diktats. They don't have to listen to anyone and they have their own free will. And then when another person is added, then it is only between them. But when the number increases, then there are so many mindsets there. So one will have to be careful, otherwise one gets beaten down, or one has to be very timid, that always one listens. So in the first place, for an individual to act, it must have that moral fiber which dictates all the terms that is being used by that person. So it is actually the internal mode of conduct, the moral mode of conduct. Then when that person comes into contact with another person, there are certain guidelines, like you don't pull a woman, you know that will offend her. So you have to be very nice to that person if you want to be friendly, and if you don't want to be friendly to the person, you can call all sorts of names. So you have certain guidelines which actually term it whether you are right or you are wrong. But when you come to the whole lot of people, then it's a society, and this society also you have certain guidelines how you behave in that society. Especially I was going through some readings lately, and it was very interesting to note that in US there is only 1/4 of population which is in the rural area, and they are in far flung, because the land is so large, they are in far flung areas. So what happens is, for their own protection, they form their own cultural norms and they abide by it very strictly, but still there are guidelines. And then comes the state. You have so many societies existing along. If you want them to exist harmoniously, you need to have certain guidelines, and guidelines, as you know, do not have teeth. So a state cannot function like that. So the state decrees that you shall cross the road on the right side, or you shall cross the road left side. Whatever it feels is good for that country or for that state, they will actually pass that decision, and therefore it becomes the political decision and becomes the code of ethics. For every profession you can have this code of ethics, or for every society also you can have this code of ethics. But then if you have to make it mandatory, you legislate. So that's the step actually even our guidelines have gone through. So you find that in the beginning you have the internal code which guides you, and then comes the larger interest by the state which guides you externally. With that in mind, now you understand that ethics is actually the correct behavior dictated internally by one's own moral integrity. Guidelines are norms for correct behavior but cannot be forced, and laws are actually correct behavior governed externally or enforced by the state. We already have these rules laid down in our tradition when it comes to the medical system, as has been enunciated by Charaka Samhita, and he related about Sushruta Samhita. The same thing goes for the Islamic perspective, and interesting fact is that all of them have spoken something or the other about research also, because most of the things that have been handed down as treatment were actually observations and a little bit of experimentation. So you find that even here it was said, no matter what the circumstances, he must acquire information from anywhere or anything which may prove beneficial to the recovery of the patient. So this is again a risk benefit analysis there. So you have Charaka Samhita there, and you have the Western Hippocratic Oath, and both say first do no harm, primum no nocere. And if you translate it into English, you might find the beauty of languages. Primum can be prathama, na nash, nash is harm. And you also learnt about the utilitarianism and the Kantian philosophy, that every action of yours is dictated by the circumstances, leading to consequences. So, on one hand you have a group which says we will do the greatest good for the greatest number. So, that is the utilitarian philosophy, and the other one is whatever you do, do it right. You are not bothered about the consequences, whether it harms the sibling, it harms the parents or it harms the society. Do it right, what you feel is right, do only that. So, that is the other thing. Sometimes there is a lot of conflict between the two theories, and this is exactly what happens in ethics committee meetings also. You have always, just as you have two sides of a coin, there are always two thoughts there expressed by people, sometimes vehemently, but ultimately you have to come to a common good for the patient. 1980, one of the first guidelines in the world came from ICMR, and it was followed by another revision in 2000. And unless everybody used to say that if it has no teeth, wherever we went it has no teeth. So, we thought, oh, it should be legislated, and legislation process has been started from 2002, it is still lingering on. It is with the ministry right now to go to the cabinet for the ultimate processing. So, but I feel that you have so many acts, still people are violating it. So, when you make guidelines, you say it has no teeth, you legislate it, but after legislation what happens? We have yet to see what will happen after this becomes an act. So, in 1980, when the ICMR guidelines came out, it actually touched on the principles which are followed even now. It spoke about ethics committee, informed consent, clinical trials, and then research on the special group, children mentally disadvantaged and those with diminished autonomy. And it also stated something about traditional medicine research. So, the importance of traditional medicine was felt even at that time, and also about publication. These were the salient issues existing at that time, and so these were described. It was a small pink booklet which was forgotten even by ICMR scientists, and it was only in with the advent of new technologies in science and the rapid pace with which it was progressing, it was felt that it was now time enough to add to the already existing guidelines. And I would say that the point on traditional medicine is different now, because at that time in 1980 guidelines, there was no specific guideline about traditional medicine research. So, it was written in that the regulatory authorities need not pass it, because it was handed out heritage, our heritage that we were practicing this system. It should be very safe, that must have been the feeling at that time. But now we have all guidelines and everything restricting the use of traditional medicine even according to certain norms. So, with this we revised the guidelines in 1996 and as you know, Justice Venkat Chalaya was the chairperson of that committee in 1996, which went through the process, and it was 4 years later that it got released. And the areas that were identified were clinical evaluation, clinical research. I mean, these are the specific areas: epidemiological research, human genetic research, transplantation research, and assisted reproductive technologies. At that time, we did not have the guidelines for this particular technology. So, it was quite elaborate in the beginning, and later it was felt that it is more a practice related area. So, not much of research, because what is being brought to India is actually the finished product, the finished knowledge. So, not much of research was going on here. So, at that time they felt that still because there were no separate guidelines for assisted reproductive technology, we will have some salient aspects of that included in this guideline, which was mainly for biomedical research. And we have, in our revision, we have maintained that, along with some addition from the document which came out later on accreditation of these clinics, accreditation and regulation of these clinics which are actually conducting the assisted reproductive technologies. You have more than 400 guidelines circulating in the world. but you must know that the first guideline from India was actually not first. I must say that the Indian guidelines is already there on the how many of you have Indo-US projects or have had some connection with them? Can you describe about federal wide assurance? Very short.
Federal wide assurance is an assurance that the institution which is conducting research in connection getting with the funds from the US federal government, it has to enter into an agreement with the US federal government, and this can be done online. It is available in the OHRP website, Office of Human Research Protection. There's an online form that we have to fill up giving details about the legal name of the institution and whether we have an IRB, and generally the IRB is also registered with the OHRP of the US federal government. That is, this is for research being conducted in collaboration with the US federal government, and in that there is one section which gives details about the different types of ethical codes and guidelines outlined, and we are happy to say that even ICMR guidelines have found a place in that. That is, we have 45 CFR 46 along with that ICMR guidelines, even the Canadian guidelines, all those things, and the institution has to check the guidelines that it is following in that particular institution, and then it is submitted to the US federal government. This FWA has to be renewed once in 3 years. If the renewal is not done, then the institution becomes deactivated. It is not eligible to receive further funding. And you can find details of all the organizations registered with OHRP in the OHRP website, all the organizations which have FWA.
So for international collaboration, we have guidelines only for the Indo-US collaborations as to what is the researcher required to do, registering the research that is to be done with particular emphasis on research ethics review. So because of that, the ethics committee has to be actually listed with the US. There are certain requirements, and then as you see, as she had explained, the guidelines that are supposed to be followed are the US ones, and then the 2 foreign ones are Canadian Tri-Council Policy and the Indian Council of Medical Research. So that much importance was given to the Indian guidelines because it confirmed more or less with the requirements that are generally needed for the protection of the research participants. And one funny thing is that, as she said, the website has a list of the researchers who have had the federal wide assurance. And funnily speaking, if you look deeply into it, you find so many societies and all that registered with them, which we have not even heard of. And we found every year when we try to renew our assurance, we find funny things. And this time what we found was a particular group in Northeast region had tacked on to ICMR's ethics committee. How could that be done? So immediately I sent enquiries. Of course, this is registered with the OHRP. We asked them, and then they pointed out some person's name to get into contact with that person, and then finally this person from India responds and says that, and I used to get emails saying that our project, this thing, kindly approve that. I don't have a proposal with me, how can I review that? And then I wrote to this person saying that in what way are you connected with ICMR? Because if you are tagging on to another institution, you have to have an MOU. I just wanted to highlight that there are rules and regulations in place. Many a times it's ignorance, but through international collaboration, you are forced to learn things. And now your presence here also is a requirement which has been generated due to these activities. The US has got a lot of research coming to India, so they want the investigators to be trained. And that's how they are funding not only India, they are funding other developing countries also based on the merits of the proposal.
If you have an international trial where there are several sites all over the world, and India being one of the centers, then what should be the procedure? Like, it starts at a particular date, but is there any shortcut to it that in order to, remain in tandem with the
No, many a times we encounter difficulties because it doesn't have to be in tune with, they say that on 1/1/2008 they will initiate the trial.
Yeah, that's right.
But then in your particular site, it may not have been approved even by the ethics committee because they have got dates.
Yeah.
Okay, so it need not be uniform. And more details about this will be anyway covered in the IRB, in the session on ethics committees. Now coming to the differences between 2000 and 2006 ethical guidelines of ICMR, I would just like to point out few differences. You can go through the guidelines whenever, not only today or during the course, even later when you come across difficulties, you can always consult us on those matters. So the difference here is that initially I must say that one of the reviewers, Urmila Thatte, is here, who had gone through these guidelines. It was actually her suggestion which said that there is nothing spoken about ethics committees in the principle related to voluntariness, because the concept of waiver was not added in the earlier guidelines. And many times you face a situation where taking consent would be very, very difficult, and sometimes it is not required. So who decides that? It is not the researcher who decides. So this particular fact was brought into focus in this in the revision, 2006 revision, and the ethics committee's role was added in that particular principle. Starting from the first one, essentiality.
Madam, sorry to interrupt. What are the situations wherein the waiver would be required? What are the examples, one or two? Because I'm not
example, you want to study a disease burden, say HIV. Okay, it's a sensitive area, and you require so many things that if you are going to take the blood, you have to have a pre-counseling and the post-counseling, all those aspects, and it requires a lot of infrastructure, facilities. A single researcher won't be able to do that. Okay, unless you have these facilities in place, you can't do it. But then how do you study the disease in that particular locality? You have to have things done confidentially. But on the other hand, you also have the responsibility that if you find a particular person as HIV positive, should you leave that person in lurch? So sometimes you have to take very difficult situations. Which is more important? Prioritization. You have to prioritize your requirements. And if you feel that disease burden is more important, especially in that particular locality, if you find that HIV positivity is 90%, then you can have another project where you can go individually to people and then give whatever post-trial benefits you can give. Okay, here the ethics committee would say that perhaps we could waive consent in this particular situation. There are actually, these waiver of consent is described in the ethics guideline which you have now. So the conditions where you can actually ask for waiver.
Okay, thank you.
Generally, this is a sensitive area. The other thing is, whenever an individual is threatened by revelation of your results, there also you can have waiver of consent. Okay, coming to essentiality, it should be very essential to conduct that particular research. You can't decide, or maybe on frivolous grounds. You say that the sun is rising in east today. I would like to know whether it rises in west tomorrow, or maybe the angle changes or something like that. And then you need the whole team, meteorologists, geophysicists, and all those people come into the picture. But what are you going to gain from this? So whenever you decide for research, you have to see that it has some relevance. Relevance to the society now or for future, that depends. So that has to be decided, and that is where your scientific review committee comes into the picture. First step is science should be good. That is the first ethics that you have to observe. If science is not good, you don't proceed at all. Then voluntariness, it should be informed consent. I mean, the person should be well informed, and if it's a community study, then the whole community should be informed, and there are processes, if it's of national significance, then it's all the more important that you devote quite a lot of time for that. And I think no better person than Neeta Mawar can speak on that, and they have had a lot of experience on that, how they went about the HIV trial, preventive vaccine trial, how they taught the community, took peers from them, and it's a whole lot of process, it's a subject by itself. Then they should not be exploited, the privacy and confidentiality should be maintained, there should be adequate precaution taken to minimize the risk, and of course the people concerned should be professionally competent. One point I would like to highlight here is that for traditional medicine, in our country we have the formally educated practitioners. We also have people who have learned the art from their forefathers, handed down from generation to generation. But there are people who have like hobnobbed with friends, or maybe there is a Vaidya in the family who has been doing that, they have learned from that, they have learned some tricks, and they feel that they can try this in some group of people. So that also would be research. And now what happens, because of the concentration of the Westerners to find ways of collaborating with people who can give them that knowledge. They have no knowledge that in India, for the international collaboration, all the proposals go through the Health Ministry Screening Committee, and there is a whole lot of process for that. And the moment it goes to for peer review, if you are just a non-formal person, it will never pass, because you need to have expertise in that particular area. So that's the importance of professional competence. In fact, there were 3 American researchers, well-known names in complementary and alternate system. They were interested in that. They have done some studies, and they were very much interested in having an Indian collaborator. Some conferences, somewhere they get to know people and all that, they get impressed and say, can we have collaboration? They said, yeah, why not? And then they come on a trip to these places, and then they see for themselves, and they say, okay, we can write a project. So the person also says yes. Of course, that person doesn't know that there are certain rules and regulations. And then these people go back, get NIH funding, and they are on a frenzy. What's happening in India? Why the proposal is not going through? And I had been accosted by the director of NCCAM saying that there are 3 proposals in India, it's just pending. Then I told him, next time onwards, you give NIH funding only to those proposals which have got Indian practitioners who have been formally educated. Otherwise, you will find this problem. And then we asked, anyway, we are there to help. So we asked this Indian researcher that please associate yourself with a person who is formally educated. Then I get a 1-page write-up, biodata, a person who has just passed, has no experience in research, but had been associated with these people for this particular aspect that they were studying. So that also doesn't go through. So one has to be very, very careful about these aspects. Then accountability and transparency, I don't have to explain much about that. Institutional arrangements, the institution also is responsible, it's not the researcher alone. Institutional arrangements, they have to make, provide all the facilities for carrying out such research. And totality of responsibility is where it's not only the researcher, but also the institution as well as the sponsor responsible if anything goes wrong. It's not that the whole brunt is borne by the investigator.
Ma'am, myself as a physiotherapist, I want to clarify the stance on professional competence for making research. Physiotherapy in India exists since 1960s, but there is still no council for physiotherapy in India. There is no government council. The only one body which is regulating physiotherapy as a subject is Indian Association of Physiotherapy, which is a registered body but not a government body. So do we fit into that?
You have raised a very important point. Actually, you have to be associated with somebody who comes under that registered category.
Registered body. Will that suffice?
not your registration. What I said is about the Medical Council of India registration, professional bodies. Yeah, Urmila?
A person wanting to do physiotherapy research, I mean research on physiotherapy, why do they need an association with someone? I mean, their degree is granted by a university and then they're allowed to practice, so that is a qualification. They cannot do clinical trials on drugs. For example, if you want to do a trial on NSAIDs or something like that, which a physiotherapist may be seeing patients use, that they can't because they may not be allowed to prescribe those medicines. But if you can practice, I mean, if you're doing a study on some new physiotherapy technique, a physiotherapist only ought to do it, but you can do it in association with a respiratory medicine person. For example, if it's a chest physiotherapy or a cardiac physiotherapy, you'll do it because that's where your patients will come from. And you will be, the point that you have to remember in these qualifications that I have understood is that somebody has to be responsible for the well-being and health of the patient. So who is responsible? Can a physiotherapist be held completely responsible if you're not in association with a doctor? This is a question you will best be able to answer. So if you're going to do something which will involve a new technique where the health of the patient could be, you know, modified or whatever.
It ultimately comes down to who, under whose authority.
Correct. But that means you can do.
So you have to have a co-investigator. For example, neurologist. If it is stroke patient, so whichever discipline is related, you have to have a professional in that particular discipline until your this thing gets recognized. Why I am saying this is a great concern, because there are many claims coming to ICMR because there was a committee on alternate system of medicine, particular group called electro-homeopathy practitioners. They wanted to push it for recognition as a system, and they wanted to be placed at par with Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani. You can never place it at par with them. They argued that homeopathy was started by Hahnemann, so this has been started by Count Mattei somewhere in Roman Empire somewhere. So the thing is, they are actually correlating the same steps, but they have evolved a theory of their own. If something goes wrong, and there are number of people coming out, from this particular profession as doctors. So, and they have actually made 100 parliamentarians submit a petition why the system is not recognized, because they have made a lot of money from this. So there are many people, who the youngsters who want to get into a particular profession, they don't find any other profession, they get lured by this, and then at the end of it, where do they stand? They have no standing because it's not recognized. Okay, but actually we'll get into that argument later. There's a lot to be spoken on that, and then somebody else comes with funny names, Aromani technique and this technique, that technique. They evolve it on their own. It needs actually scientific validation before you can give permission, because as I told you, the state will actually look at the greatest good for the greatest number. Generally, their policies will depend on that.
There was a study in Pune itself in the medical college done by an orthopedic surgeon, and the co-investigator was a physiotherapist. The study was funded by the Ministry of Health, alternate medicine on yoga, basically zero backache with yoga, and that was done, and it was actually because the more disciplines they are involved when a study is conducted, it is much more helpful. So a yoga specialist was a co-investigator, physiotherapist was also a co-investigator, but all done under the supervision of the principal investigator, who was a orthopedic surgeon. So it depends, the kind of study. There could be multidisciplinary, because each one is accountable, each one is responsible, and the patient care is the utmost thing. I was also an experimental animal or the participant in that study, so I know a little more detail about this kind of things.
Coming to the differences in the ethical review mechanism, there are a number of differences. Now, Composition has not been changed, but the thing that came up during our discussion in Bombay, where we had members from 6 ethics committees attending that. In fact, you know, it's a to and fro learning process. We learn from you and you learn from us. So, we learned that Schedule Y of Drugs and Cosmetics Act actually lays down the membership requirement for the minimum quorum of 5. And once it comes in an act, it becomes mandatory. But then an institution does not review only drug trials, it also reviews other types of research. So, when it comes to drug trials, these are the mandatory requirements. So, that has been explained in the in our guidelines. And one thing that many regulations have to be in harmony with the regulations under other acts. So, that is why the Schedule Y Act, since it already relates about it, we have to take cognizance of that fact. Then the ethics committees members should undergo training, etc. All these are the new things added, and review procedures as waiver of consent and all those things, that will come in the next chapter. Which are the proposals which you exempt from review, and which you do, for which you do the expedited review, and who will do it, and the full review. So, all this actually comes under the standard operating procedures. Before an ethics committee actually starts functioning, it should lay down the standards which it will observe, the terms of appointment, the reappointment, and if a person does not come for more than three meetings, what do you do about that? All these things are described in the standard operating procedures. In fact, the CDs that we will be giving you will have that, because already you know your folder has become this big. So, if you require whatever you require, you can always print it out later. And then what are the circumstances under which you have the periodic review, continuing review, interim review, and monitoring actually is an important aspect which even in states it is not being followed that much. It is coming up right now that it is an important aspect, but then when it comes to drug trials, you have now this DSMBs. There will be a special session on that in the elective session, elective course. Record keeping is a mandatory requirement, because it is not only for the safety of the participant, but also for yourselves. Then the administration and management and certain considerations. Under the general issues, we have added the circumstances where you have to take fresh or reconsent. Waiver of consent is covered under that, and then as you have seen that subjects have been changed to participants, but still in editing, you know, sometimes some omissions can be there. So, in case you find somewhere subjects is written, please let us know, so that next revision we take care of that. And then we have also a selection of special groups. There are special events that have been covered. For example, in disaster, what do you do? And in emergency, what do you do? If you go by the US draft for emergency medicine, it runs into pages and pages, and they are not very relevant to us.
Madam, sorry. What's the difference between a subject and a participant?
It is like, you know about Onam? No, I was talking about the king and his subjects this morning. So, what these people feel that we are equals, we are not subject to a person, okay, so we are participants. So, that had been raised, and many places they are now changing that term to participants, but still by old habit, you know, you keep on saying subjects. Okay, now coming to specific principles, I already told you about that. Under the drug trial, we have increased the number of points under special considerations, and in the phases of clinical trials, we have added combined phase 1 and 2 and special studies. These are actually of relevance to people who are concerned with that particular area. And of course, multicentric trials, we have increased the number of points under special concerns, and in monitoring areas, again the text has been changed and some more has been incorporated. These are, I do not have to actually highlight each aspect. One important point about herbal remedies is that in the western countries or most other countries also, where this traditional system was not as formal as we have in our own country, except China of course, not even China I would say, the feeling was that everything should go through the steps like in vitro, in vivo and then human trials. But in our country what we felt was, after number of deliberations, what we felt was these drugs which have been handed down to us and this knowledge which has been handed down to us from ages is based on certain observations and experiments, and we should give value to that. So, we can straight away go into human trials, except see that there are no untoward effects, because these remedies are based on the individual's classification into 3 main types, genotypes, which we are actually presently saying pharmacogenetics. So, these things had been considered, so you can go into human trials straight away. But those which have a new indication or the traditional remedies which have been used for a new indication or will be used for a new indication, or there is a new active principle from these, they all will have to go through the general regulatory requirements. Then in epidemiological studies, you have the community participation added on to that. Herbal remedies, actually we have plenty of things to talk of, it is a big subject by itself. Then under the genetics, we have actually added the excerpts from draft guidelines. This is still in the draft stage, because we have not been able to decide about whether we should give blanket consent, we should allow blanket consent for use of the biological material, or we should give a period for that, or we should use it only for that disease. These are still open questions. Again, assisted reproductive technologies, we have removed that portion from that because it is being covered in the other one. Then we have added stem cell research. Now you know that this is national guidelines. Why we did not actually issue it is because certain areas inputs on GMP and GTP, that is good tissue practices, good manufacturing practices, etc., had to be added onto this, which was supposed to have been given by DBT. So, it is a joint effort by ICMR and Department of Biotechnology with regard to these guidelines. But as it is full, I mean it is now final. So, this is the book that I was talking about, the National Guidelines for Accreditation, Supervision and Regulation of ART Clinics in India. So, based on that, certain portions from that have been included in this for facilitating clearance of doubts to the researchers who may simply want to see what is there in that, only the salient portions. And this you already have in your kitty. The other guidelines are human animal use, somebody would be talking about that to you. In fact, Dr. Muthuswamy and Dr. Vijay Kumar are the ones who are from the regulatory, I mean from the government agency side, who know the ins and outs of what had happened from the beginning till the end of the production of this document. And genetically modified foods also is almost ready for distribution. And this of course, you know, these guys here filming it is as a result of the MOC that we executed with IGNOU for helping in the distance education. There may come a time when there would be an online course also on that, short course.
Clarify one point, major point, the issue of compensation in the research.
Compensation is also covered in this. In fact, each and every aspect has not been highlighted by me because it will take time. Compensation now is not only thought of in case of injury related to the research, but there is also a feeling now being generated that you must compensate also for non-injury related problems. So that's called ancillary care.
What is the status of, because there are so many types of research areas, fields and research methodologies. So also the research on educational intervention. So what is the status of this research on educational intervention, where we include our students within the stipulated period of time, and any module to be implemented or not to be implemented, we also test. So students are the participants.
Simple.
Here.
Do you expect any harm from that?
Directly may not be, but
What is the indirect?
indirectly students are stressed mentally.
But it will be within the minimal harm category.
Yes.
For education, research in education techniques and strategies, etc., they come under exemption from review. So that is there in the guidelines.
Okay. Record keeping is very important. Nowadays, another section of record keeping is with ethics committee. Okay. Once a researcher is doing a research, he has put his proposal into ethics committee, and then ethics committee has passed. Then he will start his work. After finishing, then he is supposed to publish the paper. We all know that it takes a lot of time for publication. How long ethics committee will keep the records of the proposal submitted to ethics committee?
But what has got that there is no relation between ethics committee keeping the records and your publication. What is the connection? Ethics committee anyway has to keep it for 3 years.
Yes, yes. Suppose if there is any query from the...
Initially what we had written was for 15 years. But
Yes.
then there are many institutions where they do not have storage spaces. So what is the point in writing something which cannot be done? So that was, it was reverted to 3 years.
By
That
that
is
time,
DCP.
if the paper is not published,
So what?
so it is not the responsibility.
Why should ethics committee record keeping prevent you from publication? That's what I'm asking.
No, no. If there is any query from, suppose, the journal body to ethics committee,
Okay.
that is the question. Suppose
Ethics
I have
committee related to what?
on any ethical issue.
Journal generally wants that whether there is an ethics committee review
Yes.
or not.
Yes,
Isn't
yes,
it? More than
yes.
that it will not ask. The ethics committee is supposed to have the minutes, everything
Yes,
kept
yes.
as record. Your proposal is kept for 3 years.
Okay.
But the records are there. Okay, and now people are even thinking of digitalizing it.
Okay.